for all to see. The signs we've lost our way. When we jail our heroes and applaud our villains and turn our hearts away. Like a silent choir, too scared to sing the anthem of a braver day. The Ballad of Dr. Bruce Paix.
Here he is. Dr. Bruce Paix is in the house. How are you, sir?
And we managed to ping it in on time yet again.
Yes. Considering we've got daylight savings, Bruce, all around the country. We've got 5 different time zones now. I think it's 5. Yeah, 5 different time zones. So that makes it a little bit interesting for people to get their head around. You know, WA is like 3 hours behind Sydney, and Northern Territory an hour and a half. Adelaide's still a half an hour, and Brisbane's the same. So they're an hour difference to New South Wales and Victoria and Tassie. So blimmin' mate, and it's school holidays over here where I am in SA as well. So yeah, lots going on.
And I think it's 3 hours behind in Bali for Carla.
Yeah, well, Carla's always a bit behind. I don't know. But Banghead. He was there early in our little stream, and he's put a comment in. There, and you got a gazump strike. It's not just me that gets gazump strikes there, is it, Bruce? And so others, the audience sometimes gets gazump strikes.
And I just looked up, Denpasar is 1400 and we're on, 5 o'clock, 1700. So, yep, Denpasar's 3 hours behind us.
Still, okay. Oh, there you go. Yes, so stole your thunder there, but you're going to be talking into it, I imagine, removing guns from sovereign citizens, which will, of course, mean anyone who doesn't agree with government. Well, geez, they've come after yours now, Bruce.
Yeah, I'm going to speak about that because this is obviously a state issue, but I think the definition of a sovereign citizen is anyone who has adverse thoughts about government. Well, Western Australia, looked it up, 60% of the Western Australian electorate did not vote for the current Labor government. And, of course, 65% of the Australian electorate did not vote for Albo. So it looks to me like 2/3 of the population are due for a police knock on the door as sovereign citizens.
Yes, anybody that's got anti-government sentiment, and we know that, Peter Dutton made that good remark that you wrote your letter to Peter Dutton after his responses to people to dob in their neighbours who have, might be having criticisms of government or anti-government rhetoric. So yes, very, very interesting days we live in, isn't it? Very interesting day. G'day, Trish Wildfire. Good to see you on board, and hopefully we're streaming nice and clear. So I might as well crack into it, seeing that you're going to be jumping into that topic a little bit later, and I'm just going to do a bit of a quick fire, some topics, some things that come across my nose over the week that I wanted to go through. Not going to spend a lot of time on it, but we'll go through it. And we may as well kick in, and then it's over to your quality content, Bruce.
Let's do this, Mark.
Stole the thunder. There you go. All right. Anyway, just as a quick reminder to people in South Australia, South Australian peeps, we've got Australians for Better Government has got a revival defining a new direction for Australia. Australians for Better Government event here in South Australia, and that is Sunday, the 26th of October. Tickets on sale now. Starts at 2 o'clock. Doors open at 1:30 at the Sporting Car Club of South Australia. So any of the South Australian peeps that want to come along and mingle, chat to some other like-minded South Australians that are looking for change, then by all means have a look at coming along to that. And obviously, as a disclaimer, I'm on the Committee of Australians for Better Government, so I want to put that disclaimer out there. Moving along, I've another article from a good friend of ours, Bruce, is Elizabeth Hart. I wanted to sort of let people know, if people aren't following Elizabeth, this one, you can't question the experts, how obedience replaced inquiry. So this I cross-posted just recently. This is It was written with assistance of ChatGPT based on a conversation Elizabeth had, who has spent years confronting what happens when people are told they can't question the experts. This startling statement made by a retired science teacher during a recent discussion on vaccination policy with Elizabeth has been echoing in her mind ever since. You can't question the experts. So encourage people to read that article as well from Elizabeth. And obviously at the bottom of here, it says, the duty to question unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth. Albert Einstein. Questioning authority is not dangerous. It is necessary. Dissent is not a threat, it is a civic duty, and we can talk about that in regards to everything that's happening with government at the moment. Hey, Bruce, is like we just talked about that in the intro, is that you question government and you all the people put labels on you and all that sort of stuff. Moving along, still with a bit of a South Australian tact here, the South Australia here celebrated 50 years today since South Australia decriminalised homosexuality, becoming the first state in Australia to do so, which is good. I think, to be clear, decriminalisation was the right thing to do in my mind. But look, at the end of the day, at the moment, we're also now grappling with the quandary of men being locked up in women's prisons, Bruce. So things have gone a long way. And the other thing is that the LGBT rainbow flag was flown on Parliament House, and I'm a big believer. I don't believe any other flag other than the Australian flag and the South Australian flag should be flown on the Australian Parliament or any Parliament or whatsoever. And I don't believe that the rainbow flag should be flown on top of those institutions for any reason. So, but anyway, that happened during the week. Another article I wanted to highlight, and you and I have talked about this in many of our episodes, is Malcolm Roberts has put an article together in his Substack about One Nation is rejecting the Islamophobia report, and I think we talked about this a few weeks ago. He wanted to share an important document with response to the Islamophobia report, which was commissioned by the Albanese government and produced by the Special Envoy to Combat Islamophobia over a 3-year period. The author, Dr. Malik Aftab, is a United Nations Alliance of Civilizations global expert on Muslims affairs. And for him, for many reasons, the report is a frustrating body of work that fundamentally fails to explain why Australians may hold views that are critical to Islam. The report does not acknowledge the failings of Islam to integrate with Western society. In particular, there is no discussion on Sharia law, cited by Australia's allies as being of significance and concern for the continuation of civil and human rights for women and members of the LGBT community. And you and I have talked about this before. There's quite a lengthy little Substack from Malcolm, but I wanted to just highlight this last little bit down here. He's got, our fear is that these reports on Islamophobia and even the report on anti-Semitism will create a sectarian framework to silence Australians and override their legitimate concerns about the future of the country they were born to and whose ancestors sacrificed everything to create. Now, the reason I highlighted that bottom one is that last week I shared quite strongly about the views of the Jewish Climate Network in regards to censoring Australians who are critical of the climate change debate. So it's not, that we're on our show that we can tend to be a bit critical, obviously, of Sharia and Islam, but also as mentioned before, I have issues when the Jewish network wants to silence free speech as well. And as I mentioned last week, I don't care who it is. Free speech is fundamental to our society. And as you mentioned, you're a free speech absolutist, Bruce. So we need to be able to continue to have these conversations. Another thing I come across this week is a bit of a pile-on, and Kurt Malberg, who I follow, great South Australian, he's got why the sudden media pile-on, and this is coming from a Sydney Morning Herald article, the far-right figures teaching students at Sydney College. Stephen McInerney and Stephen Shavura both teach at Campion, a well-connected college in Sydney's west that promises undergraduates a vibrant campus, Catholic values, and a focus on the classics. The pair also promote white nationalism. So this is a pylon because for years critics of multiculturalism were ignored, but as Australians wake up to the damage of infinity migration, dissent is spreading. The media's solution: target, smear, and try to silence the most outspoken voices. And we see this happen all the time as you get labelled as, white nationalists or racists or whatever when you're questioning anything. So the media comes and does a pylon on anybody that questions that. We've talked about it on our show before, Bruce, in regards to, and I didn't share my screen on that one, but that's where that screen is there, that one there. We've talked about it before in regards to, this whole labelling of anybody that's critical of the mass migration. We've talked about the fact that we are open to multi-ethnic Australians and from all different races and different colours, creeds, whatever they are, but we have a set of values. And one of those cultures obviously here is the Western European Anglo culture as well, and when everybody wants to stand up for that, they get labelled, Bruce, as a white nationalist or a racist or whatever. So these things are very polarizing, and good to see people actually speaking out about it. The other thing I've seen coming through this week, Bruce, is One Nation. And this is good to see, is on a bit of a climb and surpassing the Greens apparently, which is always good in my eyes, because I'd love to see the Greens in the dustbin of history, because they are the proprietors of a lot of the agendas being issued out. So it's good to see One Nation, and obviously there's a bit of a it could be because the Liberals are losing so much ground. People are looking for a different camp, I guess, because Liberals really just don't know where to put their foot. But the main thing is that the Greens are sliding down, which is I'm happy to see.
Sure,
now,
isn't it?
Absolutely. Now, the other one here is that coming through the week is obviously the resignation from the front bench of Andrew Hastie. So good to see him standing by his principles. I thought that was a really good thing for him to do, seeing that he couldn't obviously doesn't align with his front bench and the leader on regards to certain topics. And this one was in regards to migration, but he's also very critical of net zero and everything else. So he's done the right thing in his eyes and decided to step away from the front bench. So good on you, Andrew Hastie, for sticking to your values and convictions on that. And it's just a further sign that the Liberal Party is hemorrhaging and is not really a place to put your foot in that camp, I don't believe. So, and many people are agreeing with that. Another thing I saw come through the week, Bruce, was this story from the Commonwealth Bank admits jobs were offshored to India after 283 redundancies. So at first they were kind of, they tried to downplay it, but the finance sector union lodged a dispute with the Fair Work Commission. And at the request of the FSU, CBA agreed to undertake a review. It then identified 2 roles axed in Australia that were being performed at CBA India. According to a statement, the FSU says after the review, the bank also removed 30 online job ads for roles in India that had the same job titles as the roles being cut here. So shame on the Commonwealth Bank. That was a story that I saw during the week that I thought, if people hadn't seen it, maybe they could follow that up and do a bit of research. The other thing, a big one that go.
Let me just add to that, because here in Victoria, our wise rulers introduced government policy giving workers the right to work from home. And I'll just make the point that to any worker out there, if you can work from home, then Prabhi can also work from home in New Delhi. So if you're not prepared to get off your butt and go into the office, then not only will you be replaced, your job will go overseas. If you can work over the internet from Moorabbin, then somebody cheaper can do it from another country altogether. Just be aware of that.
While we're continuing to push for people who want to stay at home, work from home. Yep, absolutely. Another thing that have come up during the week that I wanted to share is this one. When we talk about obviously renewables and climate change a lot, this is actually from the Rainforest Reserves Australia. This actually went live today, Bruce. It's a map of all the projects around Australia that are ongoing and planned. And they've put this thing together. It's quite interesting for people to go and check that out. So that's quite a bit of information there, and it talks a lot into how much it's actually going to cost us. But if people want to, there's the interactive map there. You can scroll in. I mean, obviously, there's a lot that's happening in, I mean, there's some in South Australia here that I've sort of started checking out, but the eastern states, in particular Brisbane, are getting smashed with all this. So people can check this out and have a look at that. So that's Rainforest Australia. So what is it? Rainforest Reserves Australia, sorry, .org.au. So people can check that out, and there's an interactive map. People can have a look out there, and it's actually quite. I think they're talking about $1.38 trillion. That's a lot of money for the future generations of Australians to commit to this scam. And going on the same lines of that, I did share during the week an article, Net Zero's Battery Ponzi, user pays, grid controls and waste amounts. So that's an article that was shared that from an anonymous contributor on my Substack, and just a quick little executive briefing on that, and people want to check out the Substack if whoever's not subscribed. But households are promised energy independence instead of face government control through virtual power plants. By 2035, Australia will require 110,000 megawatts of storage. We currently have only 825. Total battery rollout 2.4 to 4.1 trillion. Batteries last only 10 to 12 years. Households fund 70% of the costs, government 30, which is taxpayer money. Government doesn't have any money. We talk about that. Large-scale projects deliver minimal benefit. 2.5 billion spend 1% of daily demand. Recycling gaps, we've talked about that, about the recycling of these things. So it's a massive fraud. And when you have gas storage, lifespan is decades, proven and dispatchable, 1/600th of the battery cost. And we've talked about this. So if people want to check out that little article, yeah.
We've discussed that a number of times, and I've said that the only practical way to store electricity is how nature stores it. And that's in the form of coal and oil. You convert that into electricity when you want it. You use plants to collect the solar energy. You turn those into a long-term storage form, oil, coal, gas, and then you convert that into electricity when you need it, because you can't store it in batteries. And as I mentioned a week or two back, you will be forced into an EV. You will be forced to have batteries at home. And you will be forced to do that because the government needs your batteries. They built a grid that's unstable and requires massive battery backup, which they don't have. So guess what? You're going to do it. Your car's going to be compulsorily plugged into the grid, and the government's going to be able to help themselves to the power in your car whenever they need it. And same for your house battery. You will be forced to have a battery at home, and you'll be forced to have it grid connected in real time, so your government can help themselves to what's in it. So you'll come out on a cold winter's morning and you'll find that they've helped themselves to all the electricity in your car. Just when you want to get in your car and do a 200-kilometre drive, there'll be nothing in it.
Yep. All part of the plan, Big Bruce. All part of the plan. Now, this other one, a quick one, is another article I shared. Now, this was, not sure if people are aware, but the Australia's Department of Agriculture and Fisheries and Forestry sought submission for the National Food Security Strategy discussion paper. Now, that was the feedback was requested. I think they got 288 or something submissions, but the Australia's flag on the hill. South Australia's flag on the hill put a submission together, And they've just a little bit of a briefing note here that you can read this Substack. This was put together by Flag on the Hill, but the submission warns that food security risks being reframed as food control through excessive compliance, audits, and corporate influence. Family farms and small business, medium producers are vital to Australia's food security and must be protected. Key concerns are compliance and net zero burdens, which again, we're talking about scope 3 reporting, ESG linked finance and digital monitoring risk undermining farmers' viability, corporate and government overreach, Deloitte-led task force and supermarket duopolies concentrate power away from farmers, biosecurity powers, risk of overreach, herd crop destruction with limited appeal compensation. We've talked about that even with the emergency management bill here in South Australia. A national security framing, militarisation and emergency powers may treat farmers as threats, because consumer costs, compliance increases, food price risks or reliance on imports and processed foods. So look, there's a full submission there if people are interested. I've also linked a PDF, but you can check that out on the Substack as well. Very well put together by researchers at Flag on the Hill who put that together. So well done to that if people are interested and want to look further into that. Yeah. Now, the other thing, Bruce, you and I, you in particular, with the money segment, you bring this up all the time. I actually shared a recent Substack about who controls the world. So this is from the team at Beat the Reset, and I'm not sure if you've seen this, but Tim Manger, who's the man in the hat, he speaks a lot about Bitcoin and gold and silver, and so I shared his bit. He's got a book launch here in Adelaide coming up, so I did a bit of a plug on that, but he talked really well into this. I shared this one YouTube video which talked really well into who controls the world, and he's linking it all the way up to the Bank of International Settlement and the International Monetary Fund, and obviously you've got the United Nations and all those other sort of networks all in there. So if people think that our government actually, controls what happens in our country, it's actually much higher than that. So, and you speak. We've spoken about it nearly every episode. You in particular about the money and the finance, Bitcoin, gold, silver, and having tangible assets. So yeah, I put that little Substack together just to give them a little bit of a plug as well, because it's what you talk about a lot as well.
And that'll be getting a run today.
Good, a bit another run today. Awesome. And Bruce, just to finish it off, this should make your day, and I reckon you've probably seen it. Your friends at the AFP have got a new commissioner. So it's official. Meet the 9th commissioner of the AFP, Bruce, right? I'm going to read this out for you just so you can see it. Commissioner Chrissy Barrett is today serving her first day in the chair after taking the reins yesterday from her now retired Commissioner Reece Kershaw. Her career with the agency has taken her from intern to top job. During this time, she has commanded some of the AFP's most sensitive operations, including in counterterrorism, transnational crime, and national security. But get this, committed to inclusivity, the Commissioner also serves as the AFP's First Nations champion and is a recognised leader and advocate for workplace diversity. So on behalf of the entire AFP, we congratulate and welcome the new boss for the role. So there you go, Bruce. You think that was even warranted, isn't it? Shouldn't people be, shouldn't be credited on the credentials? I mean, that first bit probably was all right, but I don't know, should the top, of the AFP be, really that worried about, those two other things, DEI and all those sorts of things? What do you reckon, Bruce? But anyway, just thought you'd find that interesting, seeing that you, maybe she, Bruce, what do you reckon? Do you think that she should? I'm just going to put this there. Do you think, Bruce, that when she gets into this job, that she might have a real good chat with the AFP officers about how they conduct themselves around the public? Because it's pretty embarrassing when they have to turn up at court and a judge has to look over her glasses and look at them. And he has to look over, the judge has to look at the AFP officers for trying to stitch a well-credited, a good member of society up for a massive jail sentence if that person didn't actually have his camera going and, video evidence. Do you think she should spend her time addressing the AFP officers in regards to not giving the citizens of Australia a burger with a lot and trying to lock innocent people up for 10 years, Bruce? What do you reckon? I mean, I think we know someone that might have a bit of insight on that, Bruce. What do you reckon?
Well, I wasn't just an ordinary citizen. I was a disabled Indigenous furry veteran. And yet they still bent me over.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think that egg can't be unscrambled. I don't care if the new commissioner's a champion of diversity, because they've already shown by their actions. I don't care about that. But I will jump on that, because that actually creates a bit of extra work for me, because I jumped on the phone today and I tried to ring the Ombudsman in the ACT, because 10 weeks ago I wrote to the then ACT AFP commissioner and said I was wrongly charged and acquitted in court of an offence, and I gave the number, the people versus the Crown versus me. And I said, please confirm that you have destroyed all forensic samples that were collected from me as part of my arrest, including photographs, fingerprints, and any other biometrics. So I sent that to the AFP commissioner 10 weeks ago in Canberra, and I got no answer. So about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I followed that up with a letter to the ACT police minister saying, as the responsible minister, can you please direct the AFP police commissioner to answer my question? And I sent a copy of the letter. And I got back a message from the police minister in the ACT that said, it's general policy to destroy these samples, but for specific information about your case, you should contact the AFP.
So bloody circular bloody thing. You get given the bloody runaround. Isn't this just typical of bureaucracy, Bruce?
So I replied and said, perhaps you missed the bit where I said I have contacted the AFP and they have not responded. And I'm therefore asking again that you, as the relevant minister, direct them to answer my query. And that was 4 weeks ago. And guess what? The minister hasn't replied to that either. But if you know one thing about me, Mark, is that I am a serial letter writer. And a couple of fob-off letters from authority never works with me. And in fact, I win about 60 or 70% of any bureaucratic fight that I take up. Whether it's getting out of a parking fine, a speeding fine, a failure to vote fine, I've well and truly learned that you don't just get stymied by one letter. 4 or 5 letters in is when the fun really starts. So I, in fact, thought, I know what I'll do today. I'll write to the AFP Ombudsman and ask them to look into it for me, because I know from a friend of mine who used to be a staffer in a political office that when they get these letters from constituents requiring or asking that something, be clarified or done, they're a pain in the butt. They're called ministerials and they have to be answered. So if you write a letter to a minister, they have to answer it. And it's a pain in the butt if you don't take their first fob-off answer, because then they've got to really answer it. So anyway, I picked up the phone and I rang the police minister in the ACT today just to say, look, I'm doing you a favour. I'm about to write a letter to the Ombudsman. I know what a pain in the butt that is for you. Would you like one final try at actually doing what I asked? And I got an answering machine.
Of course you did.
So that's not going to finish. That won't finish there. But let me segue from that. You mentioned Elizabeth Hart at the start. Hats off to Elizabeth Hart, great citizen, woke up to the whole fraud and danger of vaccines decades before I did, came to some of the marches with us. And I saw on Elizabeth's Substack recently, she's basically saying, did any doctor actually write to government and say, you are contravening the Nuremberg Code? And I think I did, Elizabeth, and I tried to respond via your Substack, but I couldn't because I couldn't log in. But I think I did. And I went back through my stuff, and I've got a letter from the Prime Minister replying to a letter that I wrote, giving me the usual platitudes about, safe and effective and all that. But Elizabeth, I can't find the original letter, but you know what? I've got the reply to it, and I've got the the reference. So it may well be that I did mention the ethics to the Prime Minister, and I've got the reference. So if you want to contact me, it may be possible to get my original correspondence via the link to the reply. Sorry, I can't find the original letter, but yeah, I may well have said to the Prime Minister, "You are breaking the Nuremberg Code," which is what Elizabeth Hart was asking.
Yeah, and I was going to say, you've probably learned to be a little bit more, tactful in your letters, because, as you've found out, you might, if you're writing to the AFP and that, and you say you're going to, the minister, the ACT minister, you're going to stand outside the office with the Australian flag upside down and not leave until he talks to you. You might end up having police coming around to do another gun check, Bruce. That might be another viral video coming up or something. Maybe, I don't know.
Now, if I could just add in the true Epstein didn't kill himself version, can I just tell you that I'm going to get a tattoo that says I'm not a sovereign citizen?
Yes. Yeah, you might have to, mate. You might have to put a big sign on your gate too.
Yeah. Well, we've got to be careful what that says. All right.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of other things. Hello to my daughter Heather, who was here over the weekend, did some horse training for me. And just a message to one of the local businesses. We went out for breakfast at about 11 o'clock yesterday. We hardly ever do breakfast. We thought, oh, bugger it, we'll go get one of them sort of big breakfast bacon and eggy things. So we went to the local cafe at about 11 in the morning and said, can we have a big breakfast? And the local cafe is called Salinger's, and they're generally pretty good. But they said, we stopped doing breakfast at 10:30, and it was about 10:50 or something. And I said, what does that mean? And they said, well, you can choose from the lunch menu. So it's not like the kitchen is closed or the time delay locks on the doors are shut. It's just for some reason beyond an arbitrary time, which, by the way, yesterday, the day before, would have been within the window because of daylight saving. Anyway, they said, well, we don't do breakfast after 10:30. And I said, you're kidding me. We've got two people here who'll give you, $25, $28 a pop for a breakfast that you, for some reason, can't serve as of 20 minutes ago. Like, has the bacon gone off in the last 20 minutes? And they said, no, we don't serve it after that. And we said, no problem. So we went down to the supermarket in Ararat and bought some salmon and some cream cheese and some avocados, and we took it home and had a proper lunch. So just so as you know, Salinger's local cafe, your stupid rules cost you two people's breakfast.
$50, yep. But good on you though, because that $50 sort of bought you, like you said, some good stuff, and you make your own break-in, and that beauty.
Who was in charge of that stupid rule? I don't know.
Yeah, it's just silly. I know. Yeah, I don't know what's got to do with whether or not they just put away certain produce and stuff. I mean, I haven't run a commercial kitchen or a cafe like that, so I don't know what the reasoning was, but still, there you go.
The chef was still there. The food was still there.
20 minutes.
There was no sensible reason not to do it. And note to Carla, I mean, the converse of that, I was in Bali a few years ago because I went to a conference, and we used to get a substantial amount of money each year for self-education. And one of the things you could do with it is go to conferences. And, I was somewhat conceited. I would never go to a conference because I couldn't be bothered with them unless I had to because I was speaking. So I was an invited speaker at a conference in Bali. So I had this, many thousands of dollars in my education account. So I booked a very nice suite at a very posh hotel. Got picked up at the airport in a limo as part of the package, taken out to the resort, and I can't remember where it was, for the conference, had a multi-floor, room suite. And I had breakfast the next morning, and they had this fabulous breakfast dish, which they call breakfast fish. which is sort of this salty, dried fish. And I mean, I'm just thinking about it. It was magnificent. And so I had that the first day, you know, none of their Cocoa Pops and croissants for me. It was like salty meat, really. And then next day I went down there and it wasn't there. You know, next day on the breakfast buffet, it wasn't there.
What?
So I said to one of the, you know, the waiting, attending staff, I said, what happened to the breakfast fish? It was magnificent. Where is it? And take note, Salinger's Cafe, the Balinese person I spoke to said, if you like it, we'll make you some.
Oh, well, there you go.
So, by the way, that's how you please your customers, not by saying, oh, sorry, if you'd have been here 20 minutes ago, you'd be right.
Right.
Well,
there you
a couple
go.
of final mentions before we kick into it. We've killed half an hour already, which is good because I thought it was going to be a short show.
No, that's all good.
You mentioned the Islamophobia story earlier on, and we've talked about this. Labeling things a phobia is a ploy to shut people up because no one wants to be told that they're phobic because everybody knows that a phobia is an irrational fear. You know, irrational fear of spiders, of chickens, whatever. So anybody who's critical of Islam gets labelled Islamophobic. Well, there are many things in Islam which are genuine concerns and things to be worried about. They are not irrational fears. They're extremely rational fears. And I'm speaking as someone who's lived and worked in multiple Islamic countries over my life. So, yeah, you don't shut me down by just by adding the word phobia to whatever it is that you want me to not talk about. And a similar example during the week was there was a bit of a hoo-ha because in the aftermath of the grand final for the AFL, a few of the boys got a bit rowdy and, you know, they went to a dress-up party. And I think one of the outfits was a Brokeback Mountain outfit. And that was immediately labelled as homophobic by some, to me, unknown homosexual player in the AFL, to the point where these players got censured and shut down. And in fact, we're now told that muck-up day, you know, the let your hair down day after the end of the season is not going to happen anymore to prevent these horrendous examples of homophobia. Well, message to any, you know, insert sort of precious flower group here. If you want to be treated equally in this country, that includes getting teased mercilessly by your mates, because that's what Australians do to their mates. If you want to be treated equally, you will be treated equally and we will make fun of you. And in return, you can make fun of us. If, on the other hand, you want to be treated as special, we will treat you as special and we won't regard you as equals. Your choice, people.
Yeah, bring back the day we used to be able to take the piss out of each other and just like have a bit of fun, and just everything's gone too serious, hasn't it? Offense culture.
Only on one side, you know, not allowed to make fun. Okay.
Yeah.
No
exactly
Irish jokes.
Yeah. The old Irish jokes are the best though. They've always been the butt of the jokes. Anyway, just seen a comment. What was it? Just seen a comment there from confused about daylight savings. There you go. So there you go, peeps. That's where we're at. We're up to 5 time zones now. So if it's 9 p.m. in New South Wales, hour behind for Queensland, half an hour behind there in South Australia, hour and a half in Northern Territory, 3 hours in Western Australia. So there you go. There you go, Belinda. Hopefully that's helped a little bit.
I've never really understood all the hoo-ha about daylight saving times. I think it's very useful because you get to the point where the sun's coming up at 5:30 in the morning, and unless you're getting up that early, you get wasted daylight. And I did enjoy having daylight between 8:30 and 9:30 at night, which I could use, and people who come home from work could use. So I've never really understood why there's this resistance to it. It does seem to be a pretty sensible thing in summer to me.
I mean, is it Queenslanders that usually complain about the most, because then they have to get used to all the different changes in people's times and that?
Yep, and they've never done. they're closer to the equator, so they get less seasonal variation. But it seemed quite sensible to me. Really did.
Yeah. Especially if you're like Tassie or something like that, you'd appreciate that little bit of extra time in South Australia.
In Tassie, you get a really long summer evening, which makes up for your really short winter days, doesn't it?
That's it. Exactly. All right. I'll get rid of my stuff and we'll get back into your stuff now. Back
into the real show instead of all the padding.
That's it, mate.
So
onto the quality stuff.
We've got Not Easy Being Green with poor old Snowy Hydro's projects blown out again. Poor old Florence is still in trouble. Got a little bit on health this week, and apparently childhood vaccination rates are dropping off in most US states. No idea why. I guess the experts are baffled. And you would have been pleased to see that in South Australia, two of the great saviours of the South Australian population during the COVID crisis, that being Professor Spurious and SAPOL Commissioner Stevens, have both been given honorary doctorates for saving us.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me, because I did end up seeing that, and it's like I was a bit disgusted. It's probably why I didn't bring it up in my intro.
Well, I think it's good. I never saw any evidence that Professor Spurious was actually a doctor. She never said anything that appeared to make any medical sense. So perhaps now that she's getting a doctorate, maybe she will get some sense. Who knows?
Miracles will never cease, mate.
And Commissioner Stevens addressed all this in a recent long-form interview where he basically said that he was responsible for very heavy decisions that, put a lot of burden on people, but he didn't feel any burden because it wasn't him making the decisions. So he just pulled out a variant of the old following orders defence there, didn't he? And fronted up for his doctorate with his fancy hat and his striped academic gown. Well done, Dr. Stevens.
Yep.
All right. Money and finance, well, it just keeps happening, doesn't it? The Australian dollar continues to bleed against real money, gold, silver, Bitcoin. It's substantially down against all of them this week. And in fact, gold, silver and Bitcoin are at or just about at all-time highs versus the Australian dollar, which means, of course, that the Australian dollar is at all-time lows against all of these other forms of sound money. In the diversity is strength segment, we've got yet another Islamic attack on Jews, this time in England, and we're going to discuss that. We've got a big story from Western Australia where they've begun disarming their political opponents under the guise of sovereign citizenship. And I'm going to look at the history of that. As you know, I'm somewhat of a historian, and the first thing tyrants do is disarm their citizens, and the next thing they do is whatever they want. So I'm going to look at some historical examples of that. Got an interesting segment in the miscellaneous segment where I'm going to talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect, which you may have heard of. It's basically a famous scientific paper which basically asks the question, how come dumb people don't know they're dumb? And the answer is because they're dumb. And I'm going to apply that to our wise rulers and reference some of the absolutely stupid policy decisions that they keep making. How can they keep doing this and not realise that they're idiots? Well, Dunning-Kruger effect explains that. Idiots don't know they're idiots because they're idiots.
Yeah.
Got a little bit under the Uslan bird of ridiculosity, where apparently it's illegal to eat peacocks nowadays. And I'm suggesting that's a bit of an opening for the chickens because they could avoid the axeman's chop by simply identifying as peacocks, couldn't they?
Yeah, the buck-bucks.
That might be a bit of an out for the chickens, I would have thought.
Yes.
All right, let's do this thing. Is that what we're supposed to say, Heather?
Let's do this thing. Good on you, Heather. Good on you, Heather, if you're watching. And Danny is always always passionate supporter of our show.
And Danny, Heather doesn't remember who you are.
Oh, that's hurtful.
He keeps, well, it's meant to be, coming from her dad. start of the show. So more trouble with Snowy 2. So the Snowy Hydro 2 project has, colour me crazy. It's blown out in costs again, even more so than the previous blowout in costs.
Who could have predicted that, Bruce?
Nobody could have predicted this. Certainly not the experts, curiously. So how much of a blowout? Well, the original Snowy 2 project, which started in 2018, had a $2 billion project. And for those of you who aren't aware, Snowy 2 is effectively what they call a hydraulic battery. So unlike the other Snowy scheme, which was built in, I think, from 50s, 60s and 70s and is still a functioning hydroelectric power system, where rain falls in the snowy mountains, fills the dams and lakes, and then you run it downwards under gravity through the electric generators once, and then it goes on its merry way. So that's a hydro project. Well, Snowy 2 is meant to be a hydraulic battery. So the idea is we're going to use renewable electricity, so wind and solar, to pump water from a lower level up to a higher level when we've got excess renewable energy. And then we're going to let it flow back downwards through the turbines and recover some of that energy. So it's not actually going to create any power. It's merely a way of storing it. And in fact, like all batteries, there are significant losses. And for Snowy Hydro 2, the predicted what they call round trip losses are of the order of a third, about 33%. So even if we get this free electricity in surplus from wind and solar when there's nothing else to do with it, and we use it to pump water up to the higher level, then later on we let it flow back and turn it back into electricity, we lose about a third of the energy which was put in at the start. Now, that's okay if the energy was put in at the start was going to be completely wasted, but I do make the point that batteries don't create electricity, they merely store it, and there are always losses putting it in and getting it back in. So the original Snowy 2 hydraulic battery was not the same as the Snowy Mountains project, which was successful. It was a pie-in-the-sky hydraulic battery scheme conceived of in about 2017, 2018 under Turnbull. And the original budget was $2 billion. Now, that budget then blew out by another $10 billion over the next few years to a $12 billion budget. And now they're telling us that that $12 billion budget's also going to blow out. And in fact, this story said it was looking like $20 billion now. So the original project looks like 10xing on its original cost. And that's not all of it, because I'm just talking about the dams and the pipes and the generators. Because there's another component to Snowy Hydro 2, and that's the transmission lines. Because you've got to get the electricity to and from the system as well. And so there has to be a separate set of transmission lines constructed to do that. And same, the original budget for that, the so-called Transgrid to connect this, was 1.3 billion at the start, and it's subsequently blown out to 3.3 billion and now 4.9 billion. So the transmission side of Snowy 2 is also blown out, looking like nearly a fourfold rise. And at the same time, the actual capacity of the system has dropped off by 15%. So they're now looking at being a 2.2 gigawatt system, not a 2.6 gigawatt system.
Wow.
So put those two things together. We've had the original project blow out from $2 billion to $20 billion. And we've had the transmission infrastructure blow out from a bit over 1 billion to now best part of 5 billion. So this reminded me of what we talked about last week with the ACT's world's first electric fire truck, because I'm starting to put a pattern together here. So here's what you can expect with a new renewable electricity project. You can expect it to cost a lot more than you're told. In the ACTs, the truck was twice as much. In Snowy Hydro, it's 10 times as much. You can expect the project to come online late. The ACT fire truck was 18 months late. Snowy is, we don't know how far late because it's already years past when it was supposed to be finished. And once it is finished, we can expect it not to work. That's just with the ACT. So these are just your automatic parameters for these renewable projects.
Yep. Yeah, well, they just keep churning along and continue to churn along and eat up taxpayers' money.
Yeah, more and more OPM gets just evaporated in those.
Yep.
All right, let's kick over into health. So more over-egging the pudding news, this time from the US, where it says that vax hesitancy is growing in the US to the point where 77% of districts are now recording falls in childhood vax rates since 2019. Wonder why since 2019? Eh? Why would they pick that year?
That's interesting.
Was there anything special about 20? I can't remember.
I wonder what it was.
And these falls are up to 40%. So in the majority of American districts, there's been substantial falls in the take-up rates for childhood vaccines. Now, this story said the following. It said, for more than half a century, vaccines have had remarkable success eradicating the most lethal and devastating childhood infectious diseases, saving millions of lives and ushering in a relative golden era of global public health. Now, I immediately had a couple of thoughts about that. First thought was, hello, Dan.
Oh, mate. Always gets a run, doesn't he, old mate Dan?
Now, here's my second thought. What golden era? That story said that the vax era had ushered in a golden era for public health. Well, what golden era? Chronic illness amongst children has skyrocketed over the period. Autism being an example, but every other chronic illness you care to name is up, almost orders of magnitude on what it was in the 50s and 60s. So it's hardly a golden era. Public health has cratered catastrophically in the last few decades.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, why do they say that the vaccines defeated all of these dangerous one-off infectious diseases, which you had and then never saw again, when for pretty much any infectious disease you care to name, if you graph it out, all of these diseases were largely conquered before the vaccines were rolled out. And I've got a few examples there. I've got pertussis, I've got diphtheria, I've got measles, and I've even got scarlet fever, which also was conquered over the same period of time and for which there's never been a vaccine. So where do they come from to lament this sort of passing of a golden era, which clearly didn't exist? It was a disaster. And there wasn't any demonstrable net benefit to public health. That was a fixed problem before the vaccines came out. So it seems like a rather odd story, that one.
Yes, very odd, huh?
Now, segueing into odd stories. During the week, it turned out...
I was just going to say, Secretary Kennedy did a video on that just recently, I think back on September 30th, talking into exactly those charts you were talking about, Bruce. Did you see that? He did a video. It was a bit of a 7-minute presentation in regards to... Did he hold
up my chart?
Well, he did. He showed up heaps. He was responding to, Senator Cantwell's accusation or something about his hearings and that. But yeah, so he was pushing back on it. It's about a 7-minute speech, and he's held up your charts and showing the decline prior to vaccines. Actually, quite a good presentation if you haven't seen it.
Well, I'm going to give him a gazump strike.
Oh, how dare he! Secretary Kennedy, what are you doing? It's not like hasn't been fighting this for a number of years like you, Bruce.
And I put up Gail's comment there. Let's read through that and comment on it. My daughter went to a GP in Melbourne today, complained to the receptionist as a parent just had her baby vaccinated with the flu shot and was sitting in the waiting room shedding an attenuated live virus, not even flu season. I'm not sure that's true. To my knowledge, the flu shot is not a attenuated live virus. I think it's a protein subunit. I'll stand corrected if I'm wrong about that. So I don't believe it's true that a kid who'd just been vaccinated would be shedding a live virus, because I don't think it's live. And even if it was, having just had it injected, it's got to take a while to incubate and cook before they can start shedding it. So I wouldn't be too fussed about that. And of course, we now know that, if you want to keep the immune system fighting fit, the way you do it is you exercise it. It needs to be constantly exposed to whatever new bug is going around and go through the exercise of toughening up and fighting it. That's how you build an immune library. And, if COVID taught us one thing, it must have taught us you cannot hide from respiratory viruses. And if you try, you get an obsolete immune system and you get sick when you re-enter the world because it's obsolete. It's been offline. Anyhow, we started by talking about Professor Spurrier and, of course, St. Paul Police Commissioner Grant Stevens. And both of them have been awarded honorary doctorates recently for their service to the community. And I didn't actually read why, but the obvious implication, it was for saving us during the COVID era, because they were both central figures in that. So a reminder of who these two people were. So Professor Spurrier, and I'm not going to play the "Don't Touch the Football" clip again, but it's always fun if you want to actually have a look at it. Do it. So Professor Spurrier was the Chief Health Officer for South Australia, who called the shots during COVID about what we were allowed and not allowed to do. Okay. So she drafted all of the freedom and Nuremberg destroying restrictions that were placed on the South Australian population to save us. And as we now know, none of them did anything because, as I've just mentioned, you cannot hide. You're going to flick that up. I've got a feeling you're finding it. Do you?
I have. I've got it. I've got to play it. You got to let me play it. Do I have permission? You got to let me play it. All right, got to play it. Here we go. Here she is.
If you are at Adelaide Oval and the ball comes towards you, my advice to you is to duck and just do not touch that ball.
From the pocket, have a go!
There you go. And we should play the other one too, I reckon. Here's this one.
I personally would not want anyone unvaccinated coming to my Christmas party. And that's probably about where it would sit for me.
There you go. I had to play them both again. You got to give them a run, mate.
And you gave me an opportunity there, so thank you.
Yeah, but you haven't got your sippy cup, brother. Watch your keyboard.
I'll take the risk. So there you go. That was one of the two key figures who guided us all through the COVID disaster and basically drafted all of the health restrictions that were placed on us to allow us to get through that without dying. So locking down and destroying our businesses, locking us behind masks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They were all sheeted home to the Chief Health Officer, and that's who this was. Okay. And I think she's just shown you the caliber of her thought just in that little clip there.
Yeah.
Now, the other person who was also awarded an honorary doctorate for their exemplary performance during that period was Grant Stevens, the St. Paul Commissioner. And his job was to enforce those stupid and ineffective, life-destroying and freedom-destroying regs that Professor Spurrier spat out. And here's a few things he said in an interview. So Commissioner Grant Stevens, APM, Australian Police Medal, so he's been honoured for something else as well, spoke recently about how the South Australian Police response to the coronavirus pandemic has been based on the advice of the Chief Public Health Officer. So that's Spurrier. He said, it is technically true that the buck stops with me under emergency. So he said that. And he also said that the state's performance in preventing the spread of coronavirus, oh yeah, you prevented it, did you? And the compliance with the restrictions under threat of being beaten up by armed police was testament to the community of South Australia. No, it wasn't. It was testimony of the tyranny that you oversaw to produce that. And you burned through a large amount of the goodwill that the public previously had towards the police in so doing. And I warn you that next time around, I don't think it's going to be so easy. You abused the trust that the South Australian public had, that your force had built up over a century, to the point where citizens like me now will have nothing to do with you and will not help you. So yeah, don't go about thanking the public for complying with your tyranny. We did it under duress, and we ain't forgetting.
Yep. Isn't it funny that all these people get, awarded with stuff? You had the people, crying for Dan Andrews to get a statue and all that, and all these people that ended up in, successful positions, or, got, something, a plaque or something, for everything that they've done. But yeah, it's just bloody ridiculous, mate. It's infuriating.
I thought it was curious.
Very curious.
Now, here's what else SAPOL Commissioner Stevens said. He said, as much as I'm in a position to provide advice and assist, I don't have to carry the burden of those really difficult decisions which had such a massive impact on people, small businesses, families, individuals. None of those decisions were taken lightly. So he's acknowledged that he was at the helm when a suite of oppressive restrictions were rolled out, which affected people greatly. But he said he doesn't carry the burden. So why doesn't he carry the burden? Because he'd done it. If the police had done their job and stood up and protected the freedoms and rights of citizens and said to the government, we're not doing that, that would have been serving the people. But he didn't do that, of course. He just did what he was told, also known as following orders.
Yeah, and really interesting when obviously the police force, or even detectives in particular, are meant to be critical thinkers and look at all these things. Is like, you think that you might have been conned? Like, are you thinking about things differently now? Would you do it all again? I mean, are you going to do it again with the Emergency Management Act amendments here in South Australia? What are you going to do, detectives and police officers? They're going to do it all again?
Of course they will. Now, they showed us, the police showed us what we already knew, which is you work for the person that pays you. And their checks appear to come from the government. Obviously, they come from the people, but they're too remote to notice that. So they will do what the people who are paying them are telling them. And we saw images of police officers basically saying that to protesters. I don't have a choice, mate. I've got a mortgage to pay, I heard one police officer say.
Yep.
Now, Commissioner Stevens excused himself. He excused his force that carried out these draconian restrictions on citizens by saying, quote, some of these decisions have been difficult. Well, they weren't too difficult for you, mate. You still seem to have a job. But I've had the confidence in knowing that we are acting on the best health advice available. No, you weren't. No, you weren't, Commissioner. There were plenty of doctors standing up and saying, this is wrong, this will not work, this is unethical, this is illegal. And you sent the boys round to tell them to shut up. You weren't acting on the best advice available. You were suppressing doctors who disagreed with the government, myself included. And again, not going Not going to play that clip, but it was a famous clip where the police came around and said that things would happen which I might not like or didn't want if I didn't get more careful about what I said in my emails.
Yep.
So no, Grant Stevens, you were not making the best of a tough job using the best available evidence. You were toadying up to the government and using violence to suppress citizens who disagreed. Not criminals, ordinary citizens who had a different opinion. You sent the boys round to threaten and oppress them.
Yep, Josh Teague, I believe that he abused his authority and position and power. Absolutely. Yep.
He sure did. And that's another one for Elizabeth Hart. I'm pretty sure I mentioned Nuremberg to him in some of my correspondence. And
yeah, you did. And that's one of the reasons I think he did mention. That's why he mentioned this police officer mentioned that during that discussion with you. Remember?
And I'm just trying to remember, was Josh Teague federal or state?
He was the Attorney General, State Attorney General. He was a member. Yep. Wasn't he? And yep.
All right. So Commissioner Stevens said he didn't regret any of the decisions he'd made and they were soundly based. And he didn't regret the decision to allow Black Lives Matter protesters to protest, to gather publicly in hundreds, if not thousands, at the same time as they had limits on how many people could go to a funeral. You know, it was a dozen people or something like that who could go to a funeral. And where dementia patients in care homes were abandoned and left confused and depressed because no one came to visit them and they couldn't explain why. So that's another one of the decisions that Grant Stevens apparently has no regrets over.
Yep.
Now, regarding the BLM protest, Commissioner Stevens said the following. He said that he had decided to grant an exemption to allow more than 80 people to gather at the Black Lives Matter rally. They couldn't go to a funeral, but they can go to a political protest. He said it was a unique situation that required balancing public health considerations with citizens' rights to peacefully protest, except when you were sending the boys around to my place to tell me to shut up. And he said it was a unique and extraordinary event. There is sentiment that suggests that people should have a right to peacefully protest on significant matters, but only on matters that the government and he deemed were acceptable.
Yep.
Okay. So, no, he wasn't balancing it at all. So he was saying that protests like this could go ahead. This was fine. You know, celebrating the life of a violent criminal drug addict who died whilst being arrested in the US. That was fine. We could celebrate that. That was a legitimate protest. Taking your kids to the Royal Adelaide show wasn't. And kids, by the way, had almost no risk of serious COVID. And a lot of the events were outside, which was virtually no risk.
Yeah.
It also wasn't okay to run a world standard bicycle race, the ultimate outdoor event involving the pinnacle of fitness in athletes. You know, almost zero risk of transmission here. This couldn't be run. But if you wanted to celebrate the life of a violent drug addict who met his demise whilst being arrested for a violent crime, that was fine. Why is it that Commissioner Stevens got a doctorate for anything? And how the hell is it that he has no regrets over any of it?
Yeah, makes you wonder, doesn't it? There's no, because it can't be held accountable, right? And they just wash their hands, they brush it off and say, well, you know, these decisions were made by national cabinet experts, so-called experts, don't you know, Bruce? You know, so wipe up your hands.
Just following orders. And is this the right line for the medals?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. Before you do get onto that, I did have a question on here So Maria, and I'm just going to share my screen because I think I can talk into it, but yeah, in a minute. Maria's gone with thoughts on Trump and Pfizer in the recent event. So I don't know, you probably would have seen this, but I'm just going to share this. This is from Nicholas Holscher, shared that, and you may have seen it. I'll quickly play this.
We are ready to invest, as the president also mentioned, $70 billion in the next few years from Pfizer in manufacturing and research in America alone. I really think this is an historical moment because also I can put that behind us and focus on the things that I want to spend my time: cancer treatments, bring better obesity medicines, bring better vaccines, to bring things that people value. And thank you for allowing us to do that. I want to thank Secretary Kennedy. I want to thank Secretary Latin. Your leadership helped us put that together. You were the mastermind of everything, and without the brilliant way that you designed the whole thing, we wouldn't be able to make it happen. But you were even more brilliant because you had someone in your team, but he was the driving force behind everything. And I don't have words to thank you for your integrity. And it is what you have said. We create.
I'm just going to leave that there because it's pretty sickening anyway. But at the end of the day, he's a guy, in my opinion, Bruce, that should be in jail. You know, I reckon he's one of the mastermind criminals behind pushing all this BS. Now, he's been given $70 billion for research and development. You just heard him, and his mRNA is the big platform, and it's going to be used for create the problem. Here's the solution, right? So more mRNA and cancer treatments and all that. Now, people are rightly wondering what the bloody hell is going on when you've got Secretary Kennedy. I shared a post of his the other day, who was scathing of Pfizer, and he's the CEO of Pfizer, about the crimes are committed. He's got open litigation and all that about them. So, and here he is, old mate, all smug, shaking hands, hugging and all that sort of BS. When a lot of people in our circles would love to see the guy locked up. Like, that's a big kick in the guts for people. What's your thoughts on that? I think that's what Maria's asking for. I hope I've got that right.
Yeah. Well, I had significant hopes for the Trump administration early on, and they are rapidly fading. Trump has morphed from I'm the only president who didn't start a new war to I'll do what Israel said and bomb Iran. He did that pretty quickly. He's also saying he's gone from I'll end the Ukraine war in 24 hours to, we'll just keep supplying weapons. So Trump, I'm rapidly losing confidence in. Trump has not come back and apologized for warp speed. He hasn't come out and said, I got it wrong over the COVID vaxxers. I was lied to, and I'm going to make it right because they lied to you as well. He needs to say that, and he hasn't. The Epstein affair, the honesty, the FBI, all of that, there's been no delivery. Ben Bongino and Kash Patel have clearly been captured. They've rolled them out to do the hostage videos where they're clearly under duress and lying, and they were put in there to prevent that. And about the only person I'm left with any hope for is RFK Jr., because having seen him speak enough, I think he's a fundamentally decent man, and that he recognises this is his best chance to do something good. Now, I noticed him standing in the background there, and I didn't really see enough to see whether he's uncomfortable. I was disappointed by how little distance he went with the autism announcement a week ago, basically fingering paracetamol, Tylenol. But it is early days. And if nothing else happens here except that RFK Jr. gets to the bottom of autism and makes changes there, then that's a huge win. And it's certainly much more than we would have got had the other side got in, or had anybody else in the Republican Party got in, because RFK Jr. is there because of Trump. So, yep, I agree. As Christopher Martinson said, where are the arrests? Where are the trials? Where is all the accountability? And, it looks like a lot of more of the same, but I'm still holding hope for RFK Jr. I think he's genuine, honest, intelligent, and fundamentally decent. And I think he will do what he can. and I'm rapidly losing faith in the rest of them. But at the end of the day, I don't care what Trump does with Pfizer, and I don't care what the Australian government does with whatever mRNA platform they get up in Australia. I'm not part of it. I'm not doing it. You can have all the agreements you want, and I'm sorry, I'm just counting myself out. It doesn't apply to me because I'm just not doing it.
Yep. No, totally agree, buddy. Totally agree. I was very surprised when I saw that come out, and obviously Nicholas Hulscher is putting out some great stuff. So, yeah, Jason, we're about an hour and a quarter in, mate. So, yeah, you're pulling a Carla on us, mate.
Well, Jason, what we'll do is we'll just wind back to the start for you. How's that?
And you'll watch the replay, mate. You'll watch the replay on Rumble or the Substack, whichever one.
All right. So you've just come in, Jason, at the money and finance segment, and yet another bad week for the Aussie dollar. So we've got gold up to all-time high in Australian dollars, 5,926. So it's a 3% bounce on last week. Silver's up even more to 73.52, and that's very close to an Australian dollar all-time high and very close to US dollar all-time high. And Bitcoin as well was within about 3% of Australian dollar all-time high, up to 185,000. So basically, for any comparison between the government money, the Aussie dollar, and my other forms of money, gold, silver, and Bitcoin, bad week again for the dollar, down between 3 and 9% over the course of the week compared to those things. And let's face it, the average company profit in a year, if you're making 4 to 6%, your company's doing well. Well, we've made that much profit in a week against the Aussie dollar because the Aussie dollar just continues to bleed value. And it's almost like our safe, secure, government-managed money, the Australian dollar, is losing value for some unaccountable reason. Have you got any idea what might be going on there?
Yes. Seems all by design, isn't it, Bruce? It's all by design. And this has been a big kick in the guts for the all the experts who are forecasting that the policy from the Labor government about the 5% home buyers has come and kicked them in the guts because all the property companies all forecast that it would increase house prices, and it has. Lo and behold, have already started ticking up. The house prices already kicked up because of this scheme the government's put in. It's a big kick in the guts for people trying to get in the housing market.
Yeah, so they've done nothing to make housing cheaper. All they've done is to make it easier to borrow. That's what it does. And I did hear during the week that the average person has to save up until they're in their 40s just to put a housing deposit together.
Yep.
What happened? What have they done to our money?
Yep. And all these stupid ideas about giving people money to, to get into housing, and just, of course, it's going to pump up prices, isn't it?
Yeah. So what have they done to our money? Well, I saw an example of this during the week because I was down at the post office and the postie came in with a $50 note. She said, "Look at that, it's counterfeit." And she'd been given it by the pharmacist just around the corner. There's three businesses in my town. There's a post office, a pharmacist, and the local cafe that doesn't do breakfast when you want it. So she'd just been round at the chemist, and the chemist had given her this note, and the postie's got like this counter machine to put it through, but it looked sus. So it was made out of plastic, but the cutting off wasn't right. The size wasn't quite right, and she ran it through the machine. It sure enough said undenominational, which means we don't recognise it. So this was a sort of photocopied $50 counterfeit note. And by the way, the local media said there's been hundreds of these passed in the area recently. And one of the scary things is it included that sort of transparent area with the Southern Cross, which when it was introduced, that was like a security and anti-counterfeit measure. So they'd managed to counterfeit that. And the whole thing, I mean, it was pretty easy to pick. It just the color wasn't quite right, the size wasn't quite right, but it was close, and it had been successfully passed at the pharmacy, so it was counterfeit. Okay, so that's a great jumping off point for why is counterfeiting money illegal. So the reason it's illegal for you and I, or whoever did this, to just print money is because what they're doing is they're producing a note that has nothing backing it. There is no value. So they print it. It has no value. It steals value from all the other dollars that are already in existence because there's no backing behind it, which is, of course, exactly what the government does every time they print a dollar as well.
Yep.
So they print a dollar out of nothing. It dilutes the value of your dollars by stealing value from them. That's why prices go up. Because simply printing the note doesn't produce value, doesn't produce goods. And it is possible to do that because the dollar is no longer something real that's backed by work. And for centuries, money was something that had work embedded in it. When it was gold, you had to do a lot of work to get gold. You had to dig it up. And even in the modern era, you have to put a lot of diesel into a lot of very big machines and spend a lot of money to dig up gold. So to get gold, you had to do work. That's what's called a proof of work system. Bitcoin, by the way, is a proof of work system as well, the work being electricity in that case. So the thing that stopped you counterfeiting money was you had to do so much work to do it that you might as well dig the real thing up. That's called proofs of work. So when the government turned into a paper money, government managed with no gold behind it, they can just type it into a screen or print it. So it doesn't have that embedded value, doesn't have anything preventing you from just printing it when you feel like it, which of course governments do, which is why the number of the notes goes up, the value of the money goes down. That's where inflation comes from.
Yep.
And by the way, Australia is the third largest gold producer in the world, producing last year 284 tonnes. The only countries that were higher than that were China and Russia, both up in the 300s. So Australia is a very major gold producer. And yet we don't back our money with gold. We don't back our money with gold.
Stupid, isn't it? Like, it's crazy stuff.
Why don't we back it with gold? Because governments don't want to do that because that stops them printing it. And they love printing it because they're spending addicts. It's just like a credit card that has no limit. So,
and Australia just followed then the US when the US gave up the gold standard or something, wasn't it? Australia just followed in lockstep, like many other countries are the same, yeah?
Yeah, look, there were multiple stages in that, starting in 1944 at Bretton Woods, when it was decided that after the war, the US dollar would be the reserve currency, so the premier currency of the world, and that the US dollar would be backed by gold, and that every other currency in the world would be linked to the US dollar and therefore also backed by gold. And that worked fine until the 70s when they took away the backed by gold bit from the US dollar, which took away the backed by gold bit from every other dollar because they're all linked. And that allowed governments to just print money from 1971 onwards, and they did. And that's why there's almost no value left in any government money. The US dollar, gold was like $20 or $30 an ounce in 1971, and now it's 3,000, because not that the gold's gone up, it's that the dollar's gone down. As I mentioned, pine lime splice, 17 cents in 1973, $3.80 now. The ice cream hasn't changed. The money's lost almost all its value because they've printed it to oblivion. And they like doing that because they can print it and spend it before the market works out that this is counterfeit and it's not worth anything. That's what they do. And what I was just thinking,
Albo, talking about bringing in assets and residential taxes, they're doing this now overseas. This is another separate tax, the inheritance tax. On the
we'll chunk that up. We now live in a country where we are ruled by spending addicts. Governments cannot control their spending, and they won't. So they simply must get more money, and they get more money by printing it and by taxing. So taxes will just go up over time because they're addicts and they can't stop.
And I was just going to say, Bruce, about this. You know, you were talking about that counterfeit $50. I'm just thinking, you know, could that be just another thing that the powers to be might implement? Is, you know, we've talked about conspiracy before about whether they actually put in a whole heap of counterfeit money to say, oh, see, you know, we've got all these people looking at counterfeiting. There's another reason we have to go to digital, another reason we have to go to central bank digital currencies and that, because we can't control this effectively. The technology is getting better. You know, people are going to continue to counterfeit and we can't control it. So, you know, there's another reason for them to kind of push for CBDCs. I don't know. What's your thoughts?
Of course. Absolutely. One of the techniques of war is to destroy your opponent's economy by counterfeiting their money. So, for example, during the American Civil War, the North counterfeited large amounts of the currency of the South, the Continental, and put them out into circulation to cause massive inflation and destroy them. So here, the government could certainly use that as a tactic to destroy confidence in the dollar, if there's any left anyway, and force people into a digital currency. Absolutely. It's on the cards.
Yep. Every which way you turn, they're trying to manipulate the system to bring everybody about. You know, and the banks are helping with this. They're closing branches all the time. I know that the Citizens Party is doing a big petition about there's no bank in the east coast of Tasmania now at all. Down. Yep. So it's
and
no, East Coast, West Coast. Sorry, I think it is. Yeah, West Coast
would be the West. Now, here's the point: the Australian dollar is only one form of money, and it's clearly a failing form of money. Reference the fact that it's losing a few percent in value every week for the past times we've been talking about it. There are other forms of money. There's gold, silver, and Bitcoin. They are sound money. They can't be counterfeited, and they're going up in value relative to it. So I urge everybody to, one, understand that government money is failing, and two, understand that there are options. And if you're not tech savvy enough to look at Bitcoin, then look at precious metals. You know. I guarantee you, if you're in Venezuela or Zimbabwe and the inflation rate's 1,000% a year, every stallholder knows what the value of gold and silver is. You can use that as currency. And even here in Western Victoria, I've had discussions with a number of tradies who come and look at jobs for me. And I've said to them, you know, I like to keep my accounting costs low. You know, would paying you in cash keep the cost down? And they'd all say absolutely. And I've said, well, what about gold and silver? And again, I've had more than one of them say, oh, yeah, I'll take gold and silver. So even in Australia, these things are starting to be forms of transaction because the tradies know that they're getting money which doesn't lose value and is private, which is super important.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. Now, I said there that Australia is one of the biggest gold producers in the world. We're the third highest, 280 tonnes a year. And yet we hold virtually none as a government, about 80 tonnes. Now, that tells me something. One is that the government does not want our dollar to be backed by gold. And they don't want it because that prevents them printing it, counterfeiting it. So that's the last thing they want. But the other thing it tells me is that if they ever have to have gold, the gold in the ground is what the government will take. So they'll do what's called nationalise the gold mines. They'll say national emergency, strategic asset. This is now a government property. So our government will regard the gold that BHP and Rio and Fortescue or whatever hold underground. They'll regard that as a government asset, and they'll seize that as well, if and when the time comes. And like I say, desperate governments do desperate things. We have a government addicted to spending. They will steal whatever value they can find ultimately over time. And brings us back around to this, which is...
What's that comment here? Anyway, I remember reading when they came and stole people's gold as they put everything they had into purchasing gold, it was taken from them. What was that? Was that in another country? I don't know. I remember seeing anything like that. I don't know if you have, Bruce.
Yeah. Private ownership of gold was made illegal, I think in 1971 in America and also in Australia. So the government basically said, national emergency, gold hoarders are destroying the economy. As of now, to protect everybody, we need to centrally manage all the gold. Otherwise, you know, the country fails. So anybody who's holding gold has to sell it to the government for the current price, which I think then was about $20 US. And some people fell for it and some didn't. But once they'd done that, they then revalued gold to $36. In other words, they'd just stolen nearly twice the value. They paid a certain amount for it. And then a week later, they said, oh, see, the official price is now twice as high. So it was illegal to hold gold for about a decade in Australia and might have even been longer in the US for that reason. They didn't want citizens able to hide their wealth in things that the government couldn't skim through inflation. So they made it illegal. And look up the date. I might be getting some of those dates confused, but the private ownership of gold was illegal for a long time in the US and Australia to force you to hold government money, which the government could then skim via inflation.
Yeah.
And
well,
fact, I think I said it was 71. I think it was in the 30s that they made the private ownership of gold illegal. And they didn't make it legal again until the 70s when Nixon said gold is not money anymore. Yeah,
it was a long time. Yeah, so it was amazing how they can just enact things and then stop you creating your own wealth and using something, isn't it? It's always in the government's best interest, isn't it? And
they label it. They label it the same way as they label it next time. They said it was the dirty hoarders holding on to gold who were destroying the economy. So they demonized people who went, no, I know what you're up to, and I'm not playing that game. They made out they were the problem when it was the government.
Yeah, of course. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's a bit like people choosing not to be vaccinated. They're the problem to the rest of society, right? It's not the government pushing the bloody jab. And I know that you've done this before. You've private message because we're kind of obviously you're careful not to give financial advice to anybody. But Maria was asking about reputable precious metal distributors here in SA. So I don't know if you want to get her to PM or email you.
No, look, absolutely, I can answer that easily. When I lived in South Australia, if I ever wanted to buy a gold or silver coin, I'd go to City Gold in North Terrace, I think it was, right in the centre of the city. It's called City Gold. Excellent business, understood the value of privacy, and I never had any concerns that I wasn't getting the real stuff from them.
There you go, so, City Gold. There you go, easy answer.
City Gold. It's just on one end of Rundle Mall, basically.
Yep, cool. And you
I don't hold gold and silver anymore. Not after it was all lost in that boating accident, fire, machete robbery. But if I were to buy it, that's where I'd buy it.
Yep, no worries.
And final thing I mention here is that the biggest pot of gold that governments are going to steal when they really have to, of course, is your super, because that's a bigger pot of gold than any other pot of gold, and they're already sniffing around it. And desperate governments do desperate things. Trust me, they will steal your super in the future, because that's the biggest pot of gold out there, and they're going to hoover up any money they can find.
Yep,
Right.
Absolutely. Snouts in the trough.
Now, final finance story here, and another one for the old inflation is really 10% archives. So this story during the week said that house prices are up 9% in the last 9 months. So that's 12% a year. That's about 10%. So again, that says to me that the real inflation rate is not 2 to 3%. This is yet another commodity that's going up at 10% a year.
Yep. Geez, we keep bringing these examples, don't we, Bruce? You keep bringing those
and I don't
examples.
cherry pick them. You know, I haven't found any that are minus 27 or plus 1. No, it's just every time a figure comes up, it's of the 10% mark.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Switching gears.
Diversity is divisive.
The diversity is strength segment. So another day, another Islamic attack on a synagogue, this time in the UK, where a citizen of diverse background attacked. He drove his car at a synagogue, then he got out and started stabbing people before the police came along and shot him dead. Now, pro tip for anybody, if your neighbour's first name is Jihad, might be worth keeping an eye on them. Just saying. Just saying.
Yep. Your neighbour.
We'll come back to that shortly. All right, moving into the government overreach segment, the govern me harder section. And Western Australia's overstepped the mark this week because over the weekend, WA police raided 70 properties and seized 135 legally owned firearms on the grounds that the registered firearms owners were no longer fit and proper people because they held beliefs that aligned with sovereign citizen ideologies.
There we go. See, yes. Who could have predicted this, Bruce?
This bleeds on from the Desi Freeman story, who was labelled prominently as a sovereign citizen, despite the fact that evidence surfacing that he denies that he's a sovereign citizen, and in fact, sovereign citizens believe the law doesn't apply to them. Well, Desi Freeman had taken cases all the way to the Supreme Court, arguing within the bounds of the law. So Desi Freeman agreed that the government is illegitimate, and I have a sympathy with that because in many ways I don't like what they're doing either, and I think that they're hurting me and other citizens with their policies. But the media labelled him as a sovereign citizen, and guess what? A month later, we've had police raids in Western Australia where they've rounded up the guns from the sovereign citizens. That was the reason. You know, as you may or may not know, that in Australia we don't have a right to bear arms. It's a privilege, and it's done at the pleasure of the police commissioner. And they can simply say, I, the police commissioner, do not regard that you are a fit and proper person. That's it. Rights withdrawn. Privileges withdrawn. There doesn't have to be any explanation. There's no guidelines. There's no pushback. If the police commissioner says that you are not a fit and proper person, that's it. The boys will turn up and empty your safe.
Yep. Wow. It'll be mindful, Bruce.
I'm not a sovereign citizen either, by the way.
No, of course not. But you fit within their category, though.
I have a few concerns about this action over the weekend in Western Australia. Now, first thing is that even on election day itself, which was earlier this year, a large majority of the Western Australian voters did not support the Labor government. In fact, they got into power with less than 42% of the primary vote. So 58% of the citizens disagreed with the choice of this government in Western Australia. So if a sovereign citizen is someone who doesn't believe the government is legitimate, then you could argue that the majority of Western Australian citizens are also sovereign citizens based on that.
Well, yeah, 58% of people don't believe that they're, that's right.
And of course, Albo was 35%. It's even less.
There's even less. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, here's the second thing I want to say about that. As you know, I'm a bit of a historian and I have hundreds of history books on my shelves, and I don't watch TV, I read books. And history has shown us that tyrannical governments have a strong history of disarming their citizens as a prelude to whatever it is they want to do next. And arguably, governments in the West are becoming increasingly tyrannical. reference vaccine mandates, reference censorship of the internet, reference free speech crackdowns, etc., etc. You can easily argue that the direction of drift of our governments is in the direction of authoritarianism and tyranny. And like I said, the first thing tyrants do, if they haven't already done it, is they disarm their citizens. And as I said at the start, what's the second thing they do? Whatever they feel like.
Yeah. Yep. And this is why they're always looking for, in every conversation, the demon rats are always looking for opportunities to, for further gun controls in America, the right to bear arms, and because that's what they want. The demon rats are the party of wanting to put the controls in place, like here, our Labor Party.
Now, shall we? I'll exempt you a strike there, but I would like to talk a little about the US and the Second Amendment, because the US is one of the very few countries in the world where the citizens have a constitutional right to bear arms. So it's the Second Amendment. And by the way, the amendments to the US Constitution, the First Amendment being freedom of speech, the Second Amendment being the right to bear arms, these weren't amendments in the sense that they were additions afterwards. They would have been better referred to as clarifications. So when they were putting their constitution together, in the discussions, there are a lot of people who said, well, hang on, the Constitution says this, we need to clarify what that means. And that's what all the amendments are. They're clarifications, they're not changes. So the Second Amendment said, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Mm-hmm. So the people, the ordinary citizens, have a constitutional right to be armed. Now, the reason that that was put in there is because the American Constitution was written just after the American people had revolted against a tyrannical government known as the British, and fought a revolutionary war and thrown them out. And they did that because of perceived overreach. Taxation was one thing, hence the Boston Tea Party. So when they'd done that, they'd overthrown their tyrannical government, brackets the British. When they wrote the rules for their new country, they wanted to make sure that their government could not grow in that level of power and tyranny again. And the way they hedged against that risk was by allowing the right of all citizens to be armed. And the reason for that was to allow the citizens to protect themselves against the government. That was the specific reason. So the Second Amendment is not about deer hunting. It's not about shooting criminals who want to come through your door. It is about preventing your government from infringing upon your rights. That was specifically clarified at the time, and it arose in a setting where they just fought a war over exactly that. So that's why the American citizens have a right to bear arms. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, we are on a British legal framework, and so we don't have that. And surprise, surprise, given that the British lost a revolutionary war against citizens with private arms in, 1776, I think, the British don't regard an armed citizenry as a good thing. They don't regard it as a freedom right. The British regard it as a privilege, and Australia being based on British law, same here. We don't have a constitutional right to be armed in this country. Having a gun is a privilege which you have to justify why, and there are a limited number of reasons why, and a privilege that can be revoked by the police commissioner just by saying, I don't think you're the right sort of chap. You're not a fit and proper. Okay. And in fact, in Australia, using a gun for self-defense, whether against the government or against the machete-wielding Somali who breaks into your house, is specifically excluded as an approved use. So if you want to get a firearm and you put down on your reason to acquire, I want to protect myself against burglary, you will be denied. That is not allowed. You know, you've got to put down target shooting, vermin control, whatever. Okay. So countries in the British tradition regard gun ownership as a privilege, not a right. And it's a privilege that the government can take away. And guess what? The government loves taking away from everybody. Look at the trajectory of this country in recent times. They're taking away every right that you've got. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people point to the US and say it's the Wild West. Schools are getting shot up. You know, people are getting shot all the time. It's a disaster. And they're correct. When you have more guns in private citizens' hands, one of the downsides is that there is more gun violence. There are more robberies and burglaries. There are more murders committed with it, etc., etc. Although, having said that, if you take away murders committed by young black men, about 80% of gun crime in America goes away, and their rate of gun crime drops back to pretty much any other European nation. So, yes, there is a downside to having guns in the arms of your populace, and that is from time to time the occasional individual citizen gets shot. But people who say that's a reason to take guns away from citizens are ignorant of history, because history has shown that the dominant cause of gun violence is not robbers, it is governments. And in fact, there's such a thing as democide. So democide is defined as the intentional killing of unarmed or disarmed persons by government agents acting in their authoritative capacity and pursuant to government policy. So governments killing their citizens causes gun violence at levels that utterly dwarf any of the occasional and one-on-one incidents that you might see. And there's some numbers. So Mao was responsible for 77 million deaths of his own citizens. Stalin, 62, Hitler, 20, and Pol Pot, 2. And that's just governments killing their own citizens, democides. This isn't governments killing citizens of other countries by invading them. And as we know, there were tens of millions of other citizens and soldiers killed in the Second World War. And war is a government program. War is a government program. So the reason the US has this tradition of private individuals having guns is to prevent governments doing this. That is exactly what it is there for.
Yeah. Were they democracies under Mao, Stalin, Hitler, and Pol Pot, Chris?
They weren't democracies. Democide doesn't mean they were democracies. Demos is the people. So this is the people being killed by their governments. It's not democratic governments killing their peoples. No, demos means the people. You know, demographics, for example. So we're going to go a long way with, gang bangers popping caps in people or domestic violence. It'll be a long time before we kill 60 or 70 million people and decide that it wasn't worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think, and Trish put a comment in here, if something was done about poverty, or there wasn't as much poverty, you think that crimes in general might drop in that regard too?
Well, there's two sides to that, because, of course, crime creates poverty. Not just poverty creates crime. Crime creates poverty. And as an example, you go to Harlem or the Bronx, people don't have wealth and they don't run businesses, because what's the point when somebody's going to come through your door and take your stuff? By the way, that's what governments increasingly do as well.
Yeah.
But if you go back in history, a century or two ago, populations were incredibly poor compared to now. No running water, no transport, no electricity, no TVs, one set of clothes, maybe a special set for church, we had nothing in the past. and yet people were buying a large law-abiding. So no, it's not necessarily the case. Some of the poorest areas of America, the Appalachian Mountains way up in the northeast, have very low crime rates. So no, it's not necessarily the same thing.
Yep.
Anyway, what I'm saying is that the reason America had a tradition of private ownership of guns was to protect private citizens from their governments.
Yeah,
that's what.
Look, stop those sort of figures up there again. But yeah, that's. But you know what? They don't need guns anymore, Bruce. They just, they roll out a safe and effective, don't they, Bruce? Oh, look at me go. Zombie. Look at me.
Okay, so I was going to say, we'll probably never know how many of the citizens, how many of the demos were killed during the last government program, because we'll never find out. We'll just never get told. But that's another example of a government program where people could not say no to government because they were not armed anymore in the American tradition. And funnily enough, as our governments become more tyrannical, for some reason, they don't want the citizens to have any means of saying no to government. Why is that?
Why is that?
Take your guns away, censor you, cancel your job, etc., etc. Lock you up in jail if you say the wrong thing. Thought police.
Yeah, well, label you to make 80% of the population work for the people trying to enact all these things.
Yep.
Us versus them. It's all part of their design.
So, given that little history that I've laid out there, I am extremely wary of governments that want to disarm their people, such as the Western Australian government has just started on. And mark my words, it's coming. It's going to spread across Australia. Western Australia has recently enacted the most draconian gun laws in the country, maximum of 5 firearms. And that might sound like a lot, but it's not. So back when I lived in South Australia, when I did own firearms, which I obviously had to let go when I moved to Victoria, I had a pistol because I was a military member. I used to shoot a Browning 9mm pistol once a year for the military, and I used to deploy with it. And I thought, I need to practice with this. So I bought my own 9mm and I joined a pistol club and I practiced every week with it. So that was one. Now, on top of that, I bought a revolver as well, because if you're shooting handguns, there's 2 basic types of handguns. There's semi-automatics and there's revolvers, and they're completely different. So I went, okay, I'm a pistol shooter. I need a revolver as well, so as I know how they work. So that's 2. Okay. Then I had a shotgun, because guess what? If you want to shoot birds, that's what you shoot them with. Or snakes. You try shooting a snake with a rifle. They're this thick. That's 3. Okay. Then I had a 22, because if you want to practice, practice your positions, kneeling, unsupported, prone, just generally practice shooting, you do it with a 22 because it's not real loud, doesn't annoy your neighbours, and the ammunition's fairly cheap. Okay, we're up to 4. Right? Now, I said I was a military officer, so I joined the military rifle club where you have to bring along a World War II military rifle to be a member. So I bought a 303. That's 5. I'm up to my limit already. Okay. Now, on top of that, I was a farmer. So I needed to be able to shoot foxes. So I needed something suitable to shoot a fox. So I had a 222. That's 6. But foxes mainly come out at night. So I wanted to put a night system on it, but I also wanted to be able to shoot during the day. And, you can't use both at once. So I got another one, which was a 17 HMR with a night vision on it. So what am I up to now? 7 or 8. Okay. And then I wanted to go deer hunting, for which you have to use something bigger than that. You need a 303 or thereabout. So I bought one. I was up to 9 guns without even blinking.
Yeah.
So this is nearly twice what you're allowed to have in Western Australia now. And that was just to meet my needs as a farmer, as a target shooter, as a military club member, etc., and as a worker who needed to practice with the work gun. I needed 9 guns as a bare minimum. before I could even
Yeah.
start going, well, I'm a bit of an enthusiast and I might buy that because that's a piece of art that was made in 1926. So Western Australia has just cracked down and said maximum is 5 guns. And I've just shown you, if you're a shooter, that's not enough. Okay.
Yep, exactly right, mate. Exactly right.
That's going to spread around Australia because the next thing they've said is, okay, we need uniform gun laws. Anytime you get any sort of shooting in one state, one of the reflexive stories is we need a national gun register. Okay, well, they're going to say, okay, we've got a national gun register. We need uniform national gun laws. We'll just pick the most stringent. You know, Western Australia is not going to go, oh, well, you can go back to 10 or 15. They've got law in for 5 and they want it because governments don't want citizen shooting. So that 5 is going to metastasize across every state in Australia. So before you blink, that's going to be to that. Then what are they going to do? They're going to say, you know, all that lead ammunition you've been using to shoot ducks and whatever, that's harming the environment. So that's all banned. You can't use that anymore. So the farmer who's got 10 boxes of 303 ammunition or 10 boxes of shotgun shells, all of a sudden it's like, well, sorry, all of that ammunition's illegal. You can't use it. It's gone, mate. So, like I'm saying, there's a very definite push by our governments as they become more tyrannical. They want to make it harder and harder for people to own firearms.
Yeah.
What was that? What have they got there? Yeah, they're using suicide as a reason for banning guns. Well, look in Britain. You know, this Islamist who attacked the mosque, he used his car as a weapon and then he got out and started stabbing people. It's not the weapon that's the problem. It's the violent offender that's the problem.
Yeah. Well, it's like machetes and they want to ban all knives, you know what I mean? So rather than addressing the crime situation and the people wielding those weapons or the demographic wielding those weapons, they look at the actual weapon themselves, don't they?
Well, if bans work, why not just ban crime?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, what am I? I'll finish this. Be wary of governments taking away your means of defending yourself theme with a few thoughts. So we've got this one. Experts agree gun control works. Who are the experts? Hitler, Castro, Gaddafi, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, Kim Jong-il. They agree. There's Castro again, and I mentioned him earlier. So what does the government do once it disarms its citizens? Whatever it likes. Does whatever it wants next.
Exactly.
And I would remind citizens and governments that because governments have a monopoly on violence, that is their super weapon. They want an excuse to use it. This is why it is folly to attempt to use violence against governments. It's their strength. It's what they want to do. So the lessons of history are that you shouldn't fall for that. You should remain peaceful at all times. Mahatma Gandhi showed us that, the benefits of peaceful non-cooperation. Just sit down in the street and say no. You know, if we'd have done that during COVID, if those massive marches, if we'd have all just split up into 100 different bands of 50 people, and each one of them had gone and sat down at an intersection and done nothing except sit there, Melbourne would have come to a halt. Adelaide would have come to a halt. Nobody would have got hurt. The whole thing would have just stopped. And as we've seen in Sri Lanka and Nepal, once you get enough people just saying no to government, then guns aren't a solution for government. There just aren't enough guns and there aren't enough bullets, and the security forces will not pull the trigger. Once it gets bad enough, this is how it ends.
Yeah. So you need that critical mass. And look, I probably reckon that, you know, you can kind of give people, I mean, people like yourself and others were a bit more aware about the way the world works, but a lot of people weren't. And I have to put my hand up. I was a bit very naive up until 5 years ago to a lot of things, obviously, and I woke up in a bloody massive hurry like many others. so a lot of people weren't prepared to think about, what to do. How do we get together? How do we mobilise? But I think a lot more people are aware now, and I think they'll find it a lot harder to get away with what they got away with over the last 5 years. But we'll see. We'll see.
Once people wake up, they don't go back to sleep, do they?
No.
And Maria's made a point there which hits on our 80-20 rule discussion for the last couple of weeks. The need to bring in harder repercussions and punishment for offenders as deterrents. And that's right. A very small proportion of the population commits most of the crimes. Go back centuries, pick a number, 5 or 10% of your population were psychopaths. That's just how they were born. They were just defective. They were a menace to society. And before too long, they got hung. They got caught doing something and they got hung. So those people got removed from your society relatively quickly and relatively reliably. We don't do that anymore. We see violent offenders committing violent offences whilst they're on parole and have 380 prior convictions. So you're right. We need to forget about rehabilitation and so forth. Once you've proven yourself to be a violent, antisocial person, you are simply removed from society. We don't try and rehabilitate you. We accept the fact that you're a waste. Now, I caveat that with the fact that I don't support the death penalty, and I used to. And the reason I don't support it is because I don't trust governments to have that power. That is a final thing, and they can fit you up for a crime and get rid of you by executing you.
Yeah.
So
you've had experience with that, haven't you? They can try and stitch you up the way that they try to stitch you up. They can do it to anybody, can't they?
Yep. So I don't trust governments with that. So at least if you get stitched up, you've got a chance of getting unstitched later on. Whereas if you give the government the power to execute you, that can't be undone. And I just don't trust them.
Yep.
Righto, kicking on. This is the final thing I want to say about guns. So one of the arguments in favour of the state's monopoly on violence is that it is okay for the government to have firearms because they're special people and the people with the guns are specially trained. You've heard this sort of argument? No, they're not. No, they're not. Governments are overpopulated with psychopaths because they want to be there. And that includes a lot of the security forces. I was a member of the Police Pistol Club for a time before I got thrown out for publishing that vision of the police sergeant acting unethically. And that was during the COVID era. And I can tell you that all the coppers who would turn up for their Saturday shoots reminded me of all the young soldiers that I worked with in the military and in Afghanistan and Iraq. So they trained their whole lives for this war. When they were soldiers, they went to Afghanistan and, fired off a few rounds and kicked a few heads and came back home and bought a V8 Commodore. The police were getting the same thing. They were getting their once-in-a-lifetime career-defining war moment. So they were going down to the border and patrolling the border and kicking heads and pepper spraying grandmothers and getting paid overtime and buying themselves a V8 Commodore. So they were loving it. So it's not that we've got special people in our security forces. We don't. They're worse than the average citizens. And the people that lead us are far worse because they don't get to the top unless they're far worse. They've got to be psychopaths with no morals, or a psychopath with no morals gets the job instead of them. Okay. I've been asked multiple times to run for parliament from various political parties. And every time I've said, God, no, I don't want to tell people what to do. So decent people that you might want running things don't want to do it. Whereas the psychopaths climb over the bleeding bodies of everyone else because they want that power.
Narcissistic psychopaths, absolutely right.
Correct. Anyway, where was I going with this? So the argument that, okay, well, the state and the security forces, it's okay for them to have guns because they're responsible. Well, here's an example where they're not. So in that recent Islamic attack on the synagogue in England, the perp used a vehicle and a knife as his weapons. The responding police officers were the only armed forces on scene, and 3 people got shot. So the perp, Mr. Jihad, was shot dead. One of the Jewish victims was shot dead, and another one of the Jewish victims was shot but not dead. So 2/3 of the people who got shot in this synagogue attack were own goals at the hands of the British police. So the argument that it's okay for the government to have these deadly weapons because they're special, that's just one example of where it falls apart.
Yep, absolutely.
All right.
Yep.
We're up to 2 hours. I've got a little bit more to go. And I was worried. I said to you at the start, I might be a bit thin this week. We might struggle to get to 2 hours. Well, here we are.
No, well, we had a half-hour banter at the start, so that was all right. We padded it out a bit,
Yep, well, we'll cut that out.
Yeah, good on you. Too bad. It's all right.
Miscellaneous. And this is a story that hasn't cropped up for a while, but this is another one of those shocking examples of gendered violence. Because in this case, a woman has murdered a man in a Port Pirie home, and the woman was his partner. So I cannot think of a more striking example of gendered violence. And yet this hasn't been reported as gendered violence. I wonder why that is. Don't we normally, when a man kills a woman, isn't there normally an outcry that this is men's fault and they have to fix themselves?
Yeah, always.
What's going on here? Because isn't this just the same thing but with the shoe on the other foot?
Yeah.
Ah, well.
Standard stuff. And there was another one, I think, coming out from up in the Northern Territory where Hungry Jack's employee was violently attacked by a female, female that was visiting there, but I can't find it at the moment, but it was there. But yeah.
Yep. Gendered violence. When is this crisis going to be addressed?
Wow.
All right. Now, I want to discuss this article from Britain because it's a great example of a thing that I want to discuss, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect. So in this example, you've got J.K. Rowling, who's been having a bit of a stoush with Emma Watson. So J.K., I think, wrote the Harry Potter series, and Emma Watson was one of the long-running actors in that. And what J.K. Rowling has said is that Emma Watson is ignorant of her own ignorance. And I circle that because J.K. Rowling is channeling the Dunning-Kruger paper, and that's this. So the Dunning-Kruger paper is a famous paper from psychology, which I've used in my performance appraisals at work, and I'll come back to that. But here's what it was called. It was called Unskilled and Unaware of It, How Difficulties in Recognising One's Own Incompetence Lead to Inflated Self-Assessments. And the authors there are Kruger and Dunning, despite which publish, puzzlingly, this is called the Dunning-Kruger paper when it should really be called the Kruger-Dunning paper, but there you go. And what it basically said is that when somebody is dumb, they're incapable of knowing that they are incompetent because they're dumb. So the question is, why don't dumb people know they're dumb? Well, it's because they're too dumb to know. That's what this whole paper was about. And but it's famous, and it specifically relates to self-assessment. And I used this at MedStar towards the end of my career, when I was getting less and less cooperative with HR bullshit. We got this large self-assessment thing each year where you had to answer questions about how you performed relative to the organisation's benchmarks. So it would say rate your performance in terms of DEI, Aboriginal cultural awareness, gender, all this sort of DEI rubbish. And everywhere it said rate your performance, my answer would always be, this is an invalid question, refer Dunning-Kruger effect. And I literally had 14 pages of that as an answer. So when I sat down with my my supervisor to go through it, to do my annual performance report, he just turned over each page where the answer was exactly the same, which was basically, I can't answer this because it's invalid. Can't ask people to self-rate, because if they're incompetent, then the self-rating is invalid. And he just went over all of them and he went, see you in 12 months. Anyhow,
that's the way to get them.
The Dunning-Kruger paper is important because basically what it says is that dumb people don't know they're dumb because they're too dumb to know. And I think this goes a long way towards explaining some of the appalling behaviour of our wise rulers. So I'm thinking of Nicola, don't touch that football spurrier. And I'm thinking of Anthony Albo, the cheapest form of power is renewables. They're both utterly moronic positions to hold. And yet I genuinely believe that both of those people do not know that they're moronic positions. They just don't know enough to know that they're idiotic positions.
Mm. Well, or they could be positions paid so, positions held because you paid so well that it doesn't matter.
Well, and that's the other thing, isn't it? What was that? It's difficult to make a man understand something when his income depends on him not understanding, and I think was the phrase. But kicking on from the Dunning-Kruger paper, here's something little matrix might be worth having heard of. So there's what's called the 4 stages of competence. So at the first stage of competence, you've got what's called unconscious incompetence. This is when you know nothing. You know so little about a topic that you don't even know what you don't even know.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once you start learning about a topic, you start understanding it somewhat, and you reach what's called the conscious incompetence stage. So once you get into a topic, you start to realize what you don't know. So now you know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. As you get more competent, do more work on it, you get to this phase of what's called conscious competence. That's where you now know enough about a topic that if you work at it and sit down and think about it, you can work it out. That's conscious competence. And then if you spend, the rest of your 10,000 hours and get to the master level, you get to the unconscious competence point. You are so good at whatever it is that you can do it without thinking. And in fact, you might even struggle to explain to someone else how you did it. So this is top level motorcycle races. This is airline pilots landing an aircraft in a crosswind. This is anaesthetists just feeling where a vein is and slipping a needle into it without being able to see it, or getting a ET tube in just by sort of just knowing the vibes of where it is. So they're the 4 stages of competence. They relate to Dunning-Kruger's stages, where the incompetent people are stage 1. They don't know anything, and they don't know that they don't know anything. And these are the most dangerous people because they have the most confidence. They know so little that they're just confident because they don't know what can go wrong.
Well, this is the problem with DEI too, isn't it?
Correct. Yes. And DEI is compounded by the fact that middle managers always try and employ people who are less competent than them, so they're no threat. So every layer of people that they employ is even worse. And if they're all incompetent and none of them know that they're incompetent, the whole thing falls down. And that, of course, is where the West is. That's where we are.
Yep.
Now, leading on from that, there was this story during the week in the Advertiser, which says that SAPOL has dropped its reading, writing and numeracy standards again for new police recruits. So for the second time in 2 years, they've lowered the standards. So you don't have to score as highly in the academic tests as you did last year or the year before to qualify as a police recruit.
Right.
So why would they do that? Why would they want to dilute standards which have worked for a long time? This is Chesterton's fence. We used to have a certain standard. Now we're throwing it out. Why did we have that standard if we're just going to throw it out now? Now, I think the answer is this. I think one possible answer is our national IQ is falling. And I doubt whether very many people would argue with me on that. You know, people are just getting dumber. And there's a variety of reasons why it's falling, but here's one elephant in the woodpile room. It's our mass immigration program. And IQ is largely genetic. It doesn't get better or worse. Well, it can get worse if you get a knock on the head, but you really can't make it better. You've got what you've got. And it's genetic. And this is why different races have different average IQs. Different countries have different average IQs. And if you look at the dominant three sources of immigrants in Australia in the last couple of decades, the biggest group come from India, where the national IQ of India is 76. China's the next biggest group, which is 104, which is a little above the Western average of 100. And then you've got the Philippines as the third group, and they've got a national IQ of 82. So assuming that the IQ mix of our immigrants is reflective of the countries that they came from, and I think that's a fair place to start, it's evident that we are importing a large number of citizens who are lower than average IQ compared to people who are already here. And the fact that we've got some Chinese there can't make up for it because there's not enough difference. And this is a very impolite conversation to have. This is the sort of thing where you're not allowed to talk about it. And if you do talk about it, people will immediately say that you're racist or horrible or whatever. But fortunately, I just say what I think and I don't care. And if people think I'm racist or a bigot, I don't care. I don't care what you think. So,
well, pointing out facts and the details isn't being racist. It's just, you know, you're just stating facts, aren't you, mate? So
yeah, but these facts are hurtful.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay, so why does this matter? Why does it matter if the Australian IQ is falling? And I think I've just produced an argument that says it probably is. And the reason it matters is because your national IQ fundamentally determines what your country looks like. Fundamentally determines it. So if you look in the middle there, you've got Africa, and most of the nations of Africa have got national IQs in the 70s or the 80s. And almost without fail, there are no functional, polite, developed democracies in Africa. There's none. Name one. Now, going back in the day, there used to be two civilized countries in Africa, and that was Rhodesia and South Africa. And that's when they had English and Dutch majority populations. So their populations were English and Dutch. They had the Western average IQ of 100, and they looked like Western countries. The two Western democracies in Africa have long since fallen. So Rhodesia and South Africa have fallen. They're now majority indigenous African populations. So they've reverted to countries with IQs in the 70s and 80s, and they now look like any other African country. So the point I'm making is that IQ fundamentally affects what your country looks like. And if your national IQ falls below 100, your country starts to fail as a democracy. That's a fact. And here's a practical example of why that matters. So as we've discussed previously, I served on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan in uniform years ago, spent best part of a year in the two places combined. And in both cases, the West, so America and NATO, invaded these non-Western countries. And amongst their war goals in both places was to kick out the tyrant and then set up a democracy. So in both places, we were supposed to turn Iraq into a functional democracy and Afghanistan into a functional democracy. Now, if anybody had looked at the average national IQ in either country, they could have immediately said, boss, it's not going to work. Because Iraq had a national IQ of 89 and Afghanistan had a national IQ of 80. So both of them are well short of the 95, 6, 7, 8 that you require for a functional democracy. So we could have said at the very start, look, by all means, invade the place, smash it up, kill the tyrant, but don't try and set up a democracy because it isn't going to work. The population cannot sustain it and that country cannot be a democracy. Now, of course, in neither case did anybody say that or accept that or believe that. And so in both cases, they had this decade-long, expensive, bloody process of trying to do it. And in both cases, it failed. It was always going to fail based on that. So as I said before, what your country looks like is fundamentally determined by your national IQ. And it's very important to know that IQ is not the same as education. So IQ is hardware. So when you buy a computer, the computer equivalent to IQ is how much memory it's got and how fast that the chips in it run, how much RAM, et cetera, et cetera. That's your hardware. That's the equivalent to IQ. Now, education is the equivalent of software. They are the programs you can load onto that computer and run on that computer. So they are not the same thing. And that's really important to know because hardware is fixed. You can't fix low IQ with education, and it's been tried. It does not work, and it doesn't work because it's not the same thing. A slow computer with poor memory can't run a complex program like democracy. It just can't do it. Doesn't matter how hard you try, it doesn't work. Now, I think one of the problems one of the reasons why the West is in decline is because we are lowering the IQ of the West. So the IQ test, intelligence quotient, was developed in Western Europe, and they measured, using the IQ test, they measured the intelligence of populations, and they found a bell curve. And right in the middle, where most of the population was, they called that 100. And then as it drooped out to the tails, they went 100, 115, 130, et cetera, et cetera. But in that population, where they measured the middle, they called that 100. And that was the same pretty much throughout Western Europe. So Britain, Ireland, Germany, Holland, France, they were all 100. And when you moved those populations somewhere else in the world, it stayed 100. And that's why the British diaspora has an IQ of 100. So the white population in America, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. So the diaspora that came out of Western Europe, they were 100 IQ population. When they moved, they stayed 100 IQ population. That's not true elsewhere in the world. There are other populations in the world that have lower national IQs, and there's a few that are higher, mainly in Asia. But Africa, for example, most African countries have got IQs, national IQs in the 70s. Middle East, 80s to 90s. And you look at those countries, they don't work like Western countries. So I think our immigration program is reducing our national IQ, and I think that is going to stop Australia being a democracy. And there's plenty of evidence around you already. Look at the tyranny of government. Look what people are voting for. Look at censorship. Look at crime. We are failing. And we're failing, I think, because the IQ is dropping below the 100 that was required.
The other thing, though, too, is like the slow creep of our institutions like universities and schools, you know, like I'd say, like over the last 10 or 15, 20 years, students were stopped being encouraged to be critical thinkers. It was dogma. They were, you know, told what to think by the university lecturer. No, you can't have an opinion about that because you might hurt someone's feelings. You know, that isn't part of the curriculum, whatever. So, you know, even our own population has been, before migration, I reckon, been dumbed down. I mean, look at how many people went along with what happened 5 years ago, right? And there's still so many people, you know, and the government wants it that way. And this is what censorship's all about. Is not, they don't want the alternative voices. They don't want critical thinkers challenging what's going on as well. So it's happening in so many ways. And I mean, look, even now they've come out with the Australian government. They've reduced the English minimum pass mark for Pearson test of English was dropped for certain levels. Similarly to the test of English as a foreign language, minimum score was lowered for some visa applications. So they're continuing to make it easier for people. And I'm a big believer, at the end of the day, this is just my view. If you come to Australia, we speak English in Australia. That is the language. If you shouldn't be, I don't believe you should be able to do your driver's license test or anything else like that if you're not proficient in the English language. That's just me. I think that's what we speak, that's what we read, that's what's required in everything that, you know, we do in our society. Now, it's a privilege to come to Australia. If you're not going to make the effort and learn the language of the land, then sorry, you miss out.
Yep, I agree with you. And, you know, I was in the main street of my little town the other day, and I went into the service station, and the guy behind the counter is Indian. Isn't every service station operator in Australia Indian now? And that's one family. There's a few people in that business. And I remember thinking, there's 300 or 400 people in this town. This town can absorb one Indian family, and that family will engage, will go to the footy club, will work hard, will learn. But if we had 50 Indian families, they wouldn't have to. They could speak Hindi in the shop. They could, you know, they wouldn't have to assimilate. And that's one of the big problems with our immigration program is not only are we largely selecting different cultures, but we are admitting them in numbers where assimilation is not required. They don't need to. So they don't. Yeah. It's more comfortable not to. Why would I learn a foreign language if I could speak, you know, if I move to Japan, I can move into little Aussie land and speak English. I would do that because it's easier. But I'm going to balkanize. I'm going to set up a little community that doesn't fit into the culture, and that's what we do.
Yeah. I remember going to Paris with my fiance, or before I was married, we went to Paris, and they didn't want to bar with you unless you made an effort to talk French. You know, it wasn't the friendliest experience. But anyway, that's just me. Maybe it's just one off.
Now let me just answer a couple of things here. So Retznam said, I'm not sure if it's true. If you can dumb down IQ over time, you should be able to do the opposite. And what have we got? We've got Trescat saying that fluoridated water does not help. Okay, well, I'm going to give you, both of you are going to get a gazump strike there, because I did have a bit of a read around. First off, you can destroy IQ, but you can't improve it. You know, if you whack somebody over the head, cause a major concussion, you can impair their cognitive ability, but you can't improve it. And that's been tried many times. Special programs, brain exercise, doesn't work. Your IQ is hardwired, and it depends on the clock speed of your computer. It depends on how fast you process stuff. Now, having said that, you can destroy IQ, and I looked up a whole lot of the accepted things that you can do that with. So here's some examples. So I did a search today, and the first thing everybody was pretty careful to say was it's not genetic. IQ is not genetic. Yeah, it is. That's why Africa, for example, almost every country in Africa has got an IQ of 70 or 80. And if you move those Africans to another place, the subset that moves to the new place retains an IQ of 70 or 80. It doesn't bump up to 100 when you move to Chicago, because it's not determined by geography, it's determined by genetics. No doubt about that. genetics is one of the dominant inputs to IQ. So they told us it's not genetic. Yeah, it is. Here's other things can affect it. Not breastfeeding a baby can knock between 3 and 8 IQ points off. That is huge. So if you drop your population IQ from 100 down to 92 because you didn't breastfeed any of them, you have fundamentally changed what your society looks like. And as you know, there is considerable industry pressure to tell people that, you know, breastfeeding's too difficult, it hurts, too hard to get established, inconvenient, and, you know, formula's fine. What else do they say can affect IQ? They said less reading and more smartphones. I'm not sure whether that's cause or effect. Certainly, I think now that we can just Google anything, we don't have to remember phone numbers and maps. Yeah, I can see how you're getting less exercise. But I fall back on the brain training doesn't increase IQ. You might get better at a specific task, but you don't get smarter. So I doubt if that's true. They listed poor general health as a cause of declining IQ. And there's a few subsets of that. Obesity, sure. Obesity is partly caused by eating carbohydrates and seed oils, which are inflammatory, so your brain doesn't work well. So yeah, I can believe that. They said poor nutrition can be a cause, but they defined poor nutrition as a high-fat, high-carb diet. High carb, I believe, and in fact, dementia is being called type 3 diabetes. But I don't believe a high-fat diet is bad for your brain, if for no other reason than my personal experience on the carnivore diet is that my brain speed doubled when I stopped eating carbs and mainly ate steak. It doubled. It was obvious how much quicker things worked. Veganism has been known to impair cognitive function, probably through B12 deficiency. They listed environmental toxins, so lead, which this is why they got rid of lead from petrol and why Port Perry's a area of concern in South Australia. Lead in the environment can knock between 3 and 5 IQ points off a child. Fluoride can knock off between 2 to 5 points. And multiple studies said that aluminium cookware could cause significant threats to child's IQ. Now, they didn't mention the aluminium in the vaxxers, but I did find a study where that was specifically asked by a mathematician who said he calculated that the aluminium in the hepatitis B shot, which kids were given at birth, knocked 0.1 IQ points off on average. And he then said, okay, let's extrapolate that amount of aluminium that's in that one vax. Let's extrapolate that up to the amount of aluminium in the entire childhood vax schedule. And he said that it was, I think, 16 times as much. So again, he seemed to be saying that aluminium in vaxes could be a significant effect on IQ. And let's face it, we've seen severely damaged kids with autism. Some of them might be savants, but a lot of them aren't. A lot of them can't even, make their breakfast. They don't have high IQs. Or if they do, they can't use them. Okay.
Yeah, well, this is the thing, isn't it? Because a lot of people, and I mean, we label everything autism and that, but, like a lot of very high IQ people sometimes don't have street smarts or common sense and stuff like that.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Yep, and that's true as well, that high processing skills don't necessarily convert into street smarts. Exactly right. Okay. All right. Oh, look, we're at the end there. So the Muslim bird of ridiculosity, we've got 2 or 3 segments there. So we've got South Australian teachers being told that they can't call students boys and girls anymore. Because apparently that doesn't include all the options.
Yeah. Wow.
Really? What else is there?
Wow. Really? It just gets more ridiculous every day, doesn't it?
they brought out a whole lot of options, future leaders, young studiers. There's all these options so you can avoid misgendering people by calling them boys or girls. And by the way, boys and girls aren't genders. They're sexes. So don't even know what they're talking about there. But
They always keep mixing that up, don't they?
Well, it's very complicated. Just ask Professor Skerritt.
Yeah, I'll take that on notice, Bruce.
All right.
Got to take all these things on notice.
All right. Next ridiculous thing. Update on last week's story where we had a male pedophile in a women's prison having identified as a trans person. And part of the argument was that his gender transition reduced his moral culpability.
What?
So question, if that's true, and it must be true because that's what His Honour said. I hope I'm not misgendering His Honour. So if it's true that gender transition causes immorality, again, is this something we should be facilitating in our children?
Yeah, wow. Bloody crazy. What a joke. No wonder people's outraged. She's lost the plot, hasn't they? They lost the plot in Victoria.
Yep. That's the whole point. That's the whole point. Brett Weinstein calls it the Cartesian crisis. Nothing makes sense anymore. And that's intentional. Nothing makes sense anymore. Yep. All right. Finally, final story. So this story actually comes from America, and this is a variant of the famous Florida Man series. Have you heard of the Florida Man series?
No.
It's a whole set of ridiculous stories where it would go Florida Man, and then it would tell you what Florida Man did. Florida Man, drives car into sewage tank. Florida Man marries bear, etc. So, well, in this case, Florida Man has been arrested after killing and eating his pet peacocks.
Oh.
So apparently Craig Voigt of Hudson, Florida, was arrested on animal cruelty charges after allegedly killing 2 of his pet peacocks, which he then cooked and ate. So I've got two comments on that. So one is, how is this different from killing and eating a backyard chicken? As far as I know, that's still...
Well, are they protected? Are these peacocks protected species over there in Florida? Like they, not allowed to eat them, or?
A, I doubt it, and B, they said it was his pet, so he owned the bird. Now, the second thing is, we better hope that the chickens don't get wind of this, because the chook supplies and turkey supplies for Christmas are going to be severely affected if the chickens and turkeys start identifying as peacocks.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't have the peacock thought he was safe by not identifying as a chicken, I guess. Chicken and turkey.
Yeah, what are you talking about?
Oh, dear. So does that mean if people own a cat, they can eat a cat too?
Well, again, it's an interesting thing. Apart from what they call the yuck factor, explain to me why a sentient 4-legged, 2-eyed companion animal of one sort can be eaten, let's call it a lamb, and of another sort, let's call it a dog, can't.
Yeah,
I've beamed in from space, assume I don't know anything. Just explain to me logically why one thing is okay and the other one's not.
Yeah, well, you raise a very good point. I guess in and it's very cultural too, isn't it? I know there's some cultures that will eat the cats and that, won't they? So,
and while you're at it, while you're explaining things to me as if I've beamed in from space, explain to me why, if I can identify to be a different sex, why can't I identify to be a non-taxpayer?
Well, you can identify as much as you want. Good luck with. Yeah.
You have to celebrate my decision. You have to embrace it and celebrate it. Otherwise, you're a bigot and you're a taxpayer phobe.
All right. Well, you go first. You be the test subject. You stop paying taxes, and you tell them that you identify as a non-taxpayer. You've got tax what are those countries called? You go over and you don't have to pay taxes. Havens or something. Your farm is a tax haven. There you go. You could make your farm a tax haven, Bruce.
Just think, if I set up like a family trust called Tax Haven, would that raise any sort of flags, do you think?
Yeah. Do you think they'd really have more reasons to come out to your property, Bruce? I reckon.
No.
Right. Well, look at us go. Like, this is probably our third longest show. We're creeping up to the 2 hours 40 minute mark. I think one of our longest one was just over 3 hours. So we better make way for Cafe Lockdown to jump in. Otherwise they'll lose their spot. But yep, thank you. It was very, very busy chat tonight. Thanks everybody for contributing. It was pretty amazing seeing everybody stay with us for two and a bit hours. So 2 hours and 40. So I'm pretty sure we'll bring a lot more next week again, Bruce. What do you reckon?
Cheers all.
And there was probably a lot more that we could have bought too, Bruce. But anyway, at some point we do need to pull the pin. So anyway, God bless everybody. Have a great week, and we'll see you do it all again next week. Stay safe.
To fight again for that already burned, he was driven towards the flames. All the signs are there for all to see, the signs we've lost our way. When we jail our heroes and applaud our villains and turn our hearts away, like a silent choir, too scared to sing the anthem of a braver day. A song our children may never hear, the ballad of Dr. Bruce Paix. A song our children may never hear, the ballad of Dr. Bruce Paix.